So good afternoon, this is Planning Committee B and it's the 17th of April 2024. We've received apologies from the Chair and Vice Chair for this meeting, so members need to appoint a Chair. So can I have any nominations for the Chair? Councillor Waters.
Nominate Councillor Crawshaw as his Chair of the main Planning Committee.
Thank you, and a seconder, Councillor Melling. Thank you. Okay, so you all in favour? Okay, Councillor Crawshaw, over to you.
Right, thanks everybody. I'll just introduce myself as Councillor Crawshaw, usually the Chair of Planning Committee A, so it's nice to be here in Planning Committee B. On my right is Gareth Arnold, who's the Development Manager, and on my left is Jane Meller, who's the Democracy Officer here taking minutes, and to the left of her is Rahina Chowdhury, who's the Senior Solicitor. Down each side of the table are the members of the Planning Committee. For the members of the public in the room, if I can just say we're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the alarms do go off, we'll vacate the building and we'll make sure we guide you out. And if I can just remind everybody, if you have mobile phones, if you can make sure that they're turned off or on silent. Members of the public watching may see some members of the committee with laptops. That's because some members of the committee prefer to use electronic versus the paper copies of the reports. It's not that they're surfing the internet and buying all sorts of things on, various websites and other such likes. We are all here to work. And again, just for the benefit of people in the room, this is a business meeting of the council that's held in public rather than a public meeting. So there are sections where there is public participation, but please don't try to make contact with members of the committee at any other points during the meeting. Just in terms of how the meeting will run today, there's 2 items on the agenda. For each item, I'll ask the officers to explain the plans. I'll invite members of the committee to ask any points of clarification on the plans. We'll then receive any updates to the reports. We then have the section for public participation, where members of the public who've registered to speak can address the committee. We then have the opportunity for members to ask questions on the report, have some debate, and then we move to test the officer recommendation. We test the officer recommendation first, and if that isn't accepted, then any alternative proposals can be put forward. So on to the main agenda items. Then I should just give the apologies, actually, sorry, just before I move on. So as you've heard, there are apologies from both the Chair and Vice Chair today. That's Councillor Burton and Councillor Hollier. So I'm here substituting for Councillor Burton, and Councillor Cuthbertson is here substituting for Councillor Hollier. The other thing that we do need to do as well before I start is elect a Vice Chair for today's meeting. I think Councillor Fenton has kindly volunteered for that role. If members can just indicate you're all happy for Councillor Fenton. Thank you very much and congratulations. So on to agenda item 1, which is declarations of interest.
I think we also have apologies from Councillor Baxter for the first part of the meeting.
You're absolutely right. Councillor Baxter is running late and will be joining us for the second item. So agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Anybody got anything they wish to declare? Councillor Waters.
Non-prejudicial interest into this application and the next one, as I call both the applications in for determination by committee.
Thank you. And if you can just confirm you're approaching them with an open mind then. Thank you very much. So agenda item 2 is minutes. Obviously, I wasn't here at that last meeting, but the members present who were, if you could just indicate that you're happy with those minutes. Councillor Waters, are you just indicating? Yeah, sorry, thank you. And then agenda item 3 is the general remit public participation of the committee. We've got a slightly unusual situation today in that we have had a member of the public contact us wanting to make a statement to the committee. So the chair of committee B has agreed that a short statement can be read out. It's in relation to something on a previous item at this committee. So I will just read this short statement from Phil Press, who is the chair of the York City Rowing Club. At the planning meeting held on the 13th of March 2023, I made a statement. Sorry, that should read 2024, I think. 2024, I made a statement justifying York City Rowing Club's objection to the planning application 24/00046/GRG3. This statement noted that CYC had not consulted with York City Rowing Club on the application. It was accurate and factual. My statement was then followed by that of the Director of Public Health in his position as the applicant. His statement contradicted mine by stating that consultation had taken place. The implication was clear in that it implied I had not been truthful. This is complete misrepresentation of the situation, and my truthfulness should be acknowledged. My letter of 20th of March raised this matter as a complaint and is being investigated, and as such, it is not appropriate to make any further comments at this stage. Okay, so I can then move us on to agenda item 4A of the plans list. This is the application at Hull Road Surgery, 289 Hull Road, Osbaldwick. So Gareth, if I can invite you to talk us through the plans first of all.
Okay, thank you very much. So this application is a change of use from chiropodist stroke podiatrist to a house in multiple occupation. The applicant specified the 4 residents that it will be within use class C4. There's also proposed minor elevational alterations. So this David, there you go. So the planning application site, just outlining it. It's a bungalow. So previously it was doctor's surgery. That was then replaced by the development up at on Field Lane, the adjacent to Heslington East University campus, and then this because it's the same use class, was taken over by the Foot Clinic, who are still in occupation. So this part of Hull Road is a cul-de-sac which is separated from the main dual carriageway part of the road by this wide verge. Some photographs from street level. This proposed site plan. There's multiple trackings shown on that, but we've come to an agreement with the agent that there is only one parking space to the front that it's possible to maneuver independently from other vehicles there. Existing and proposed floor plans. So at the moment there is 4 treatment rooms, reception, toilet and kitchen. On the right hand side, the proposal is for 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, kitchen, toilet and shower room, living space. 3 windows on that elevation are shown to be obscure glazed, and that's referred to in the report. In terms of elevation alterations, the porch is removed from the front elevation. And then there are amendments to the door and window configuration on that western elevation. So that's the end of the presentation. The report's in front of members from page 9 onwards, and we're recommending that permission be granted.
Okay, so are there any questions or clarification on the plans? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if you could show us where the bin store is on the plans, please. It sounds like the details of that are part of this application.
Yes.
Just here, Mark.
So set back from the front elevation.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. It's just clarification on the plans. Looking at these, it looks like the living space is not connected to the hall at the back. So it looks like the living space is only connected to bedroom 4. and the other bedrooms are only connected to the kitchen and what's that there? And the toilet and shower, there seems to be, yeah.
No, yeah.
So my question is, you know, is there a door there, or, you know, what is going on there
I
essentially?
presume that's an error, because I can't imagine a situation where the reception room doesn't have access to the treatment rooms. Yeah, but I assume that's an error, but we haven't done an internal inspection of the property.
The applicant is here and registered in public participation, so we can
Okay.
clarify that then.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that, thank you.
Councillor Fenton, I saw you next, and then Councillor Waters.
Thank you. Could you just highlight on the plan where the cycle storage is, please?
Yes, that's again proposed to be towards the rear of the site.
And that's secure.
Yeah, there is a the planning statement that came alongside came on the application shows that they intend Sheffield stands, and then planning condition 6, yeah, is secures that and the means of enclosure.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Waters.
Just paragraph 3.4, Gareth, policy H8 may not apply. Is that may not or does not?
Yeah, I think that.
If you can just hold that question, because what I'll do is I just want to go through the plans, we then do the public participation, and then that's questions on the report. I'll come to you first for that question, because I've got that down as well, but I just want clarification on the plans for the minute. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if you could please go back to the image of the surrounding area, so we can see the size of the cul-de-sac. So I'm just trying to understand the area and the pressures on-street parking, because the report says that if this development did lead to an extra car parking on the road, it wouldn't exacerbate on-street parking pressures to a large extent, but I was just wondering how big the cul-de-sac is and whether it would proportionally, whether one car is quite a big difference or not. So how far does the cul-de-sac extend beyond this?
So this is the first, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of that street. Pinelands Road. Way. No, I don't. So that's the first house in the cul-de-sac. I think there might be one, maybe two beyond here, and then a turning it.
Okay.
But yeah, it is a cul-de-sac, one way in, one way out.
So from this image, it's a little bit difficult to see where the parking is because there doesn't seem to be any cars parked at the moment. Is there parking on both sides or just along one side of the road?
I think there's room for one. There's room for a car to be parked on one side, but there wouldn't be room for two cars to pass.
Okay.
I think you'll have noted the comments of Highways Network Management and these marks that have been put in, white lines put in across the access points. I think that's because of the parking pressures that used to be experienced when it was a doctor's surgery. So this is a management, a highway management issue to try and prevent parking across driveways. You can just pick out here where there's a post and rail fence being erected along this side of the road. It stops here. I don't know whether that's been done to try and stop cars parking on the verge, which is private land. It's not highway verge here. I did not scientific. It's not in line with any guidelines that might be given by various highway institutes. I did have a look at the parking at Sunday evening, 8 o'clock. There were 3 cars parked on the street, all of them concentrated at this end. Monday, 1:30 p.m, there were 7 cars parked, and that was pretty much all the way along, and the clinic was open. There were 3 cars parked on the driveway of the clinic, which I assumed were staff cars. And then 7 p.m. Monday evening, in the rain, 2 cars parked again at this far end. So there wasn't actually any parking along here in the evening. A commercial trailer seems to be permanently parked in that location there, but that's different now.
Okay, Councillor Waters.
I was just going to say, to assist Councillor Melly, page 21 is probably your best way of assessing the length of the cul-de-sac and the fact that there's a turning head at one end.
Okay, no further questions on the plans, I don't think. So I don't think there's any update to the report.
No,
Is there? In which case we can move on to public speakers. So we just have one person registered in support of the application, which is Arif Kalfe. Is that? Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. If you'd like to just come to the front of the table. The way that this works is you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a 30-second warning when you're coming towards the end of that time. If you can then stick around, there may be some questions from committee members afterwards. On the stack in front of you, there's a button in the middle that says mic. It looks a little bit like a Wi-Fi symbol. If you press that, it'll go green. And if you want to just start in your own time.
First of all, thank you for your time and consideration in respect of this planning application, which has been made by the Foot Clinic. I'm representing the Foot Clinic today, and I can answer questions in regards to this application. Application has been called in by Councillor Walters, who's present today in this meeting and has raised numerous grounds for objections. It is noted from an external angle that every application in this ward is called in, which takes up valuable time from every committee member here today. I also extend my thanks to the planning officer for the hard work in preparing this report today. Dealing with the grounds for the call-in, which I have put in writing already, are unmeritorious. Dealing with the first one, dealing with the loss of potential residential family home. In order for there to be a loss, there has to be a home in the first instance. In this case, there was never a property, never a home. It was a commercial unit. Always been that case and always remains that case. Article 4 only applies when there's a change of use from a dwelling house to a HMO, not from a commercial unit to a dwelling to a HMO. This was the motion put forward in April 2012. And that's been provided for. Second argument, which has been put forward, is a close proximity to other student lets. There is no word students in any of the applications. It's a reference been chosen and should not be referred to. In fact, I encourage the applicants to open this to possibly the elements of your home, who deal with refugees, who are looking to reassign. This is your home, as you're fully aware, is part of City of York Council lettings, possibly even halfway home. Incorporate people back to society, a valuable essence in any community. It's not for me to decide, it's for the applicants to decide that point. Third argument, short cul-de-sac. However, there's failure to note previous decisions which have been made, in particular that there's less incoming and outgoings with regards to this. This eliminates the parking arrangements, which has already been dealt with respectively. One point to observe, the fenced out area outside belongs to the applicants, a point which has been raised numerous times. Councillor Walters claimed this land belonged to the council. He was proved that it was never belonged to the council and was challenged in that front. In fact, I'm
You've
waiting
got
for a
less
document.
than, just less than 30 seconds
So
left. then.
I'm waiting for a document which is promised to be sent from a previous parish council meeting, which has never been provided. Reference the parish council meetings which has taken place. However, there's plenty of parking considerations taking place. The national planning framework talks about sustainability to reduce the net zero target. So we're trying to get to that level. And by having an application here for approval, we try and achieve that. I therefore ask you to approve this application today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I invite members, if you have any questions, or points of clarity. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in, and speaking to us. The parking arrangements include space for one vehicle only at the front of the property, is that right? Is there space for a vehicle to park down the side of the property?
It was proposed in the previous planning drafts sent to the planning officer. However, argument raised was, can they get the bins out? Well, we say they can, but they look in the fact, can the doors open and still get the bins in and out from that point? You will notice in that drawings that there's garages at the rear of the respective gardens, so they get vehicles at the back. So if needed, we can extend that position further, but there is access and the width is wide enough for cars to park at the side. It's currently being used by staff to park. There's no problem at all with that front.
So, so if it's not appropriate, if we decide it's not appropriate for vehicles to be parked down the side of the property because it means bins can't get past, what would be in place to prevent future residents from parking there and blocking the bin access?
There possibly gates being inserted to the side of it that's open to be used. So there's options which are available. They could put gates for the extra security.
Okay.
That's not an issue, never been the issue. The recommendation before us today is to approve that based on one parking space at front, one to the road in place directly. So, but if it's decided that you want a gate put to the side, that's not a problem. A gate can be easily inserted to a side of a property.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Clark.
Just going back to my former point, if you could clarify whether there's a doorway.
There is a door. There is a doorway. I've seen the draft. There is a doorway going through from the hallway, from the living space to the rear access part of the house.
Okay.
There is.
Okay, just a question from myself, then just as a point of clarity. You said in your speech that this property has always been a commercial property.
Yes.
So it was built as a doctor's surgery, is that
That's
correct?
correct. It was always built from the very first conveyance. It's been the doctor's surgery, used as that. It's never been a residential home in any change at all.
Okay.
And if there was to be a change, then within the permitted development rights, a person could just change it without making a full formal application.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. No further questions, I don't think. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You can
Thank you,
take your
John.
place back in the public gallery, and obviously you can continue to watch the rest of the discussion. I now move us over to questions on the report and any general points of clarification. And Councillor Waters, I think you had a question about the application of the policy.
I do, but first of all, I'd just like to clarify with Gareth as regards the reasons for calling, which were considered acceptable enough to call this application in. It wasn't without merit, as the speaker tried to imply. And yes, I do call in every single HMO application for determination by committee. That's a pledge I made to the electorate in Osbaldwick, and I want them to see what is going on month by month by month. So going back to the question I was butting into to ask when you were discussing the plans, and that's paragraph 3.4 when it says policy H8 may not apply. Is that may not or does not? It's just semantics, I know, but
Yeah, I'd say it doesn't apply. H8 specifically states applications for a change of use from a dwelling house, use class C3 to HMO, use class C4, and sui generis will only be permitted. So H8 is specifically designed for that change of use, not change of uses which which aren't from C3.
I fully accept that. That's what I hoped you would, how you would respond. However, part of policy H8 is the threshold approach, which has to be taken into account. The same planning officer's taking it into account with other determinations. One that was refused that never ever made it to committee, which was similarly a commercial property with an application to turn it into HMO. So I just say to committee, you do have to have regard to those percentages in policy H8 when determining this.
Just for a point of clarification, and Rahina, I don't know if this is perhaps something that you're able to speak to. Maybe sort of between you both. Obviously, the policy was drafted in a way that it specifically is about dwelling houses and the conversion of them. But I don't know whether or not there's anything in terms of spirit and purpose, because I think sometimes there's a test in terms of, does this meet the spirit and purpose of a piece of legislation or of a policy? And I don't know whether either of you are able to speak to whether that policy was drafted purely around the conversion of dwelling houses into HMOs, or with that broader sense of how many HMOs there are in an area in mind. Because I think if the spirit and purpose was about controlling HMOs in the area, then perhaps Councillor Waters' argument about the percentages and the way that they could be applied would work. If it was specifically about controlling where there was permitted development rights to transfer from dwelling houses into HMOs, then it may be more difficult to apply. But I think that probably comes to the nub of where this discussion and debate may end up.
But shall I go first, and then Rahina can tell me when I've got it wrong. So the SPD came first. The SPD came before policy H8, and that's similarly worded. It's designed to be used for planning applications from C3 dwelling houses, C4, and sui generis HMOs. It contains the threshold-based policies and guidance, which talk about tipping points from when an area goes from balanced to unbalanced, and I suppose members can take that on board, that we consider this 10% street level, 20% neighbourhood level to be that tipping point. But ultimately, they are policies that seek to control and can only be used for that C3 to C4. So whilst the words exist and the principles, we follow the principles when we're dealing with these applications. You'll see it in this report. We look at concentrations, we look at the layout, the issues with waste, parking, all that sort of thing. But the policy is strictly not relevant because it can't be used. If we tried to take the policy to an appeal, the first thing the other side would say is this: how can you shouldn't be using this policy because it's not relevant to this application. So it's a difficult one to have regard to and not have regard to at the same time. But it doesn't have the words don't have that status as a planning policy. But we put the principles in there because they are reasonable planning principles. But I don't think you couldn't. You couldn't frame a refusal reason on the basis that there was this breach of 10% in the policy, because that would be incorrect. But you can take a judgment on the fact that 3 out of 19, I think, in the 100 meters. You can make a judgment on the basis of whether you think that's appropriate or inappropriate. The officer in this case has balanced it all up in terms of the existing commercial use, whether this reasonably small HMO would be a better neighbour in terms of the parking provisions and comings and goings and impacts and things like that.
Thanks, Gareth. Gareth has set that out quite clearly, really, for all of us. And just to reiterate that policy H8 refers to change of use from a C3 to a C4, and we're not within those circumstances with regards to this application. We're looking at a commercial to a HMO. So thank you, Gareth.
If I may, just on that issue around spirit and purpose, though, because I know that there are times when the wording, the literal wording of a piece of policy or legislation may say one thing, but the understood intention behind it can still be applicable. And then I don't know where that sits in this context, because it seems to me that the intention of that policy H8 is to control the level of, or the number of HMOs within an area. And I understand absolutely that the policy applies only to C3 dwelling houses, but the spirit and purpose behind that legislation would seem to me to be about, or sorry, that policy would seem to me to be about seeking to control the broader density of HMOs. I've heard the advice that you're saying in terms of a planning appeal. I'm just thinking in terms of a spirit and purpose type position, whether or not there's any legal grounds that would apply, or whether it's just a case of saying, no, this policy does not apply because this is not of that use class.
It's difficult for us to comment specifically on the spirit and purpose behind H8, other than what we know to be the policy of H8 and the wording that we have there and the circumstances in which it's intended to apply. If you wanted to give some weight to this element of spirit and purpose that you're referring to, I think that would form part of your broader planning judgment, rather than a reason for a direct application of the policy in these circumstances.
Okay, I think that's really helpful clarification. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Waters.
I'm sure Gareth will recall it was very cleverly worded by the planning officer, the refusal of the other business premises on Osbaldwick Lane. But reference was made quite robustly, shall we say, to the breaching the percentage thresholds with that application. And that is something that you are defending at appeal as well. So I would hate to think that any determination this afternoon would undermine that appeal as well.
I'm not sure that was a quite, that's possibly something for members to weigh when we're.
Do you agree, Gareth?
Well, every case is determined on its individual merits, and there were other issues at play with that particular application. It's a I think we slightly going back to Councillor Crawshaw's comments. It's the policy has to be taken on face value, and on face value, it can't be used. They're all we might think that it should have said this and it should have said that, but in terms of, and it should cover X, Y, and Z, but in terms of its lawful use, that policy can only apply to what it says it applies to. I think I said that it's the things that we've set them out as being planning principles, and the concentration of uses of HMOs is a general planning principle, whether we have a policy or not. And the figures are given to you for information purposes. And so I would say that just because we've made a decision on a different site on a different street, we wouldn't necessarily have to follow the same route on this particular one. If there is a divergence, I can't say directly whether there is or not. We do refer to it. We don't think it's compelling in terms of leading us to a refusal in this particular case.
I'll come back to you in 1 second, Councillor Waters. I think the one thing that I would want to just caution committee members on is, you know, we always, the mantra is we deal with the application that's before us, not thinking about how it might impact on other applications. So I would be I would, from the chair, would be urging you not to be thinking about how this might apply or not apply to any other application that is or isn't in out there. This is about this application and this application's acceptability when we're weighing the planning balance. But Councillor Waters.
Just a final one to Gareth. Can you confirm that Highways Development Control still does not support this application?
Yeah, I don't think we didn't reconsult them, so their comments are as set out on page 12, paragraph 3.6.
I'm also had that noted, and I just wanted a bit of clarification, so I'll use my discretion and jump in. So page 17, paragraph 5.21 and 5.22. The officer writing the report appears to have contradicted the highways officer in so much as the highways officer says this will have an impact on street parking, and then the planning officer writing the report at the end of 5.22 says it won't exacerbate the on-street parking. And I didn't see within those two paragraphs that there was very much evidence put forward to contradict the highways officer. It just seemed to be one assertion and then another assertion, and I don't know if there's perhaps a bit more information. You obviously alluded to having gone down and had a look at the level of parking on street, but if you could perhaps just talk to how the planning officer has come to a different conclusion than the highways officer, that would be helpful.
I think it was pretty much as I set out when I was originally answering earlier questions about the parking in the cul-de-sac. So they say that the proposed car parking arrangements are inadequate, lead to cars being parked on the street. That's true. It will, according to our guidelines, lead to one car being parked on the street. And we balance that against the fact that it's has four treatment rooms at the moment. It's a private use which can advertise its services widely, and I think the fact that Monday, there were 3 cars parked on sites and 7 cars on the street, although one was a builder's van. I think compared to the evening levels of parking, it suggests to me that there's a larger number of cars attracted to that property as a chiropodist than there would be as an HMO. Might be different times of the day, but so our judgment was, you know, notwithstanding the issue about there's clearly an parking issue in the past. I think that's largely due to the existing use, which is proposed to be replaced by another use.
Councillor Melly.
So is the current use ceased already? Is it vacant, or when you were
No, it's
did
current
those
occupation.
so those parking assessments were done when the building was actually being used for its current use?
Yeah.
And how many spaces do you think there are for cars on the road? When there were 7, was the road full, or was there still more capacity for parking?
There would have been. I think there would have been more capacity. Yeah, there would have been not a great deal more, and single figures more. If you think the space in front of, you might get 2 small cars in front of some of them, for example, but most of the parking was concentrated in this run. And then in the evening, it's at the far end of the cul-de-sac and in the turning as well.
So if there was 1 extra car parked on the street as a result of this development, that would be about a 10% of the capacity-ish?
I wouldn't want to.
No, okay.
I wouldn't want to say that. My observations and the observations of the planning officer is that that certainly in the evenings, there's sufficient parking on an extra car being parked on site, on street wouldn't impact on availability to any significant effect. In the daytime, it'd be tighter, but I think most of that parking is related to the foot clinic that's in use at the moment. That was my observation.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Gareth, you did refer to 3 cars being parked further down the street. Obviously, I'm not privy to when you went or what you saw, but I'm assuming those 3 cars were associated with 295, which is the other HMO further down the street.
I can't. Yeah, I can't say that they were. They were clustered around 299 because they were at that turning head end, as you can see on page 21. But that was 2 evenings, so that was Sunday evening and Monday evening. There was on-site parking and more on-site parking at the far end, and then more street parking. But as I say, only 2 or 3 cars.
Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question about the impacts of traffic noise on the amenity of future residents. Because Public Protection have requested a pre-commencement condition to do with noise insulation and said what national guidance this would breach if it didn't have that condition imposed. But then the assessment of the planning officer is that it isn't necessary to have that condition because other surrounding dwellings maybe don't have that insulation. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about how that advice was reached, because usually we look at each application on its merits and we apply current policy and current guidance, regardless of what other properties might be in the vicinity that were built either that didn't meet guidance or that, applied to different guidance in the past. So I was just wondering why the condition that Public Protection requested hasn't been deemed necessary.
Yeah, I think the officer took the view that Public Protection don't know. They've asked for a survey, and the officer has taken the view that the separation between the Hull Road and these properties, and the fact that the other properties aren't subject to wouldn't have been subject to that particular condition. I think let me just see.
Sorry, because I haven't read Public Protection submission in full. I've just read the summary in this report, which says that Public Protection recommend a pre-commencement planning condition for noise insulation measures, not a survey, but actual measures to be in place.
Yeah, the condition would such a condition would normally say that that measures are required to meet those World Health Organization guidelines within the building, which generally requires them to do a survey that makes that to just kind of prove that that those measures are those what they do, double, triple glazing, whatever, takes it down to the noise levels that are expected. So there would always be a survey somewhere involved. Yeah, so I mean that's the officers made a judgment there in 516 that in this particular street, because the other residential properties are, they've all been built, they're the same design, were never subject to that she didn't feel it was reasonable to require it in this particular instance. But if members feel that this property should be subject to such a condition, then that could be added. you could make a judgment. If you can make that judgment that you think it's reasonable in this circumstance, yeah.
Councillor Earl.
Councillor Waters just said that 295 is an HMO. If that's correct, how many, an HMO for how many people?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. the answer to that.
Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. It's just going back actually to the highways comments, 3.6 about adequate cycle parking should be provided in line with LTM 120. I just wanted to ask whether condition 6, which addresses that, does actually meet the requirements of LTM 120 by just providing an enclosure.
LTN 120 guidance, yeah, says one cycle space per bedroom, so it would do that.
But it doesn't
And then
make, sorry.
And then our own guidelines, the ones that talk about means of enclosure, the LTN 120 also talks about means of enclosure. So there will be an expectation that it's covered and secure.
Oh, that's my supplementary is that secure?
Yeah,
Secure.
We wouldn't expect an open fronted store, but yeah, the as important are they are Sheffield style stands that you can't unbolt.
Okay, not seeing any further hands for questions. I just wanted a very brief bit of clarification, as much from people watching as for members. So in terms of permitted development rights that this property would or wouldn't have, if it was a C3 dwelling house, it would require planning permission to convert to an HMO. That's correct?
Yeah.
If, as it is, it's a commercial property, would it be able to convert to a C3 dwelling house under permitted development, or would it require planning permission to convert to a C3?
Because this is a Class E commercial use, members will recall when the changes, I think during lockdown or during COVID actually, that grouped a large number of uses that were previously in individual use classes into one big Class E. And they are subject to a permitted development right, which allows for conversion, I think subject to prior notification. Okay, so not a full planning application, prior notification and assessment on a narrow field of considerations. But the principle of the change of use is allowed for by the GPDL.
Okay, thank you.
That's right.
Councillor Melly.
So if this was approved and the development happened to change it into a residential property and it was put on the market to let, and instead of a group of friends being interested in renting it, a family decided they wanted to rent it, then that would mean that the use class would have to be changed to C3. And then if they move out a year later and it goes back on the market again for rental, would it still have the permission of the use class C4, or would it have changed to C3 and then need planning permission to change back to C4?
The latter. So if it changes under permitted development rights from Class E to Class C3, and it was occupied under Class C3, then that will become a lawful use. And to then use it for Class C4, it would need planning permission to do so.
But if we grant planning permission today for the use class C4, that would stay with the property.
That would stay with the property for a period of 3 years until the permission expires. So if it wasn't, so you can have layers of planning applications on a property. So they don't eliminate the other one, they don't override it, they just sit waiting.
So it wouldn't be a change of
implement it.
use from C3 to C4, it would effectively have both.
Yeah, in that
permissions.
scenario, sorry, I thought you were talking about if this application didn't exist, then what would be the scenario? But yes.
But if we approve this today, it doesn't prevent it from being used as a family
No,
home. It
subject
doesn't
to-
mean it has to be used as an HMO. It could be used as in the C3.
Subject
class.
to permissions, that's right, it doesn't stop that.
Right, thanks.
Okay, I think that's us for questions. So move us into debate then. So I'm not looking at the moment for a proposal on anything, just any thoughts, anything that anybody has that they think we should be weighing as part of the discussion. And if I can just remind members in the politest possible way, if somebody's just made a whole bunch of great points, you just say, I agree, you don't need to repeat them all. But Councillor Fenton, I saw you first, and then Councillor Orrell.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose it's unfortunate that we haven't got any updated comments from Highways Development Control, because I'm kind of guessing that the issues they raised, I think most of them have been addressed in terms of secure cycle storage, the agreement that there'll be one parking space in front of the property that will enable the bins to go around the side and cycles that to be secure cycle storage. So I think that I can't see any grounds there to support refusal on the basis of Highways comments, although we're kind of second guessing whether we think how the application currently looks would address their concerns in terms of their comments around on-street parking being somehow unacceptable. I don't think that really stacks with the evidence that Gareth has kindly gathered, and in terms of the parking issues caused by the current use, I don't really see how this the change in use of itself would lead to kind of an unacceptable impact. I think on the kind of threshold debate, I suppose where I started from was thinking, well, it's already in breach of the street level 10%. It's already at 15.8%. This will go up to 20%. So I'm already kind of thinking, well, it doesn't really matter what that it's moving from commercial to HMO, because the starting point is already in breach, and I'm sure that isn't how it works, and we have to almost kind of ignore the fact that the 10% street level threshold has been breached and just consider or not consider the impact that this would have in worsening an already non-compliant situation. And I'm really struggling to get my head around the logic of that in terms of why it's okay because of the nature of the change of use in terms of worsening an already non-compliant situation. I'm still struggling to understand how I can go, yeah, that's absolutely fine, because it clearly isn't.
Thank you. Councillor Orrell, I think I saw your hand next.
Yeah, we've heard that we deal with many applications across Osbaldwick for HMOs, and for me, one of the critical things about each application is the parking and the impact on the area and the amenity of local people. We've heard, and it is a very small cul-de-sac, and if we accept what Councillor Waters says, there's already an HMO there, and Highways, even if we haven't had a further report from them, are fairly damning in saying that it shouldn't be, the Highways impact will be considerable. As far as the number of HMOs in the street, yeah, it is difficult to understand all of that. But I think it's, if we're taking the whole thing in balance, I think that's a contributory factor in the decision that we make on the application.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just refer everybody to paragraph 5.7 when it mentions about this previous use, or the current use, should I say, the potential to be not a good neighbour. It most certainly hasn't been a good neighbour to the residential neighbours living in that street all the time it's been in operation. And I really don't think we should be here this afternoon potentially putting in another use into that street that will be not a good neighbour, because a 4-bedroomed HMO, if it is used for students, generates 4 cars. 1 that will be parked within the curtilage, 3 that will be on the street, to add to the 3 or 4 that's already displaced onto the street from the other student HMO in the street, which is next door to what was a local family living before they gave up the struggle, and they privately rent their property now. You know where I'm going with this. I was torn to start with because some of the residents just are quite happy to get rid of the current operation. But I think if it became a HMO, pretty soon there'll be the similar complaints to what we're getting now as regards the parking and the increased noise from the comings and goings, because there is only one way in and out of that street. And as for the percentages, again, it's been stressed that it's not a C4 to a C3, but you can and should take those percentages into consideration.
Any further thoughts or comments? I will just chuck in my 2 pence worth, which is, I think if we were looking at it purely as a change of use in terms of a business that attracts vehicles, and it was going to a C3, which, you know, effectively wouldn't require planning permission anyway, I can completely see that that would have a positive impact in terms of the parking on the street, because it would reduce the number of vehicles associated in all likelihood, although I do always have John Galvin's sort of thing in the back of my mind about, you know, any family moving in could have all number of cars. But I think that under that circumstance, if the person with the property then wished to change it into an HMO from a C3 to a C4, it would be refused, because it would quite clearly breach the policy. So I think some of the reason I was testing the spirit and purpose was just trying to understand where and how we can take into account. And I think if I've understood the advice from Marina, we couldn't refuse on the basis of that policy, but it could be part of the weight of any balance and any decision. I think for me, where there's just a little bit of ambiguity in terms of whether there's enough weight to then sort of say that we were going to refuse, is whether or not the combination of the parking and the density together is robust enough. And as I say, I think if it was a move from a commercial to a C3, I would be seeing that as a positive impact on the street. And it's just whether or not that C4 use and the potential for associated cars with that, combined with the density, is felt to be robust enough. And we do need to be clear about being robust in any refusal, because the strong advice we've had from Gareth is that policy H8 does not apply, and therefore we would be not able to rely on that as a refusal reason. So that's kind of where I am on it. It is then time to test the officer recommendation, and as I say, the convention is that we seek, first of all, to test the recommendation, which is to approve. So I'm looking for anybody who is willing to move that recommendation. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I actually don't think that this would be acceptable development in exactly the terms, you know, recommended as part of the officer recommendation, but I do think it could be made acceptable development with conditions rather than wanting to, I don't think there's grounds to refuse it. I think maybe it needs some changes to make it acceptable. So can I propose some amendments to the officer recommendation before taking the vote as it is?
I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Thank you. I think that we have clear policies when it comes to HMOs and I think all new developments about bin access, suitable bin stores and access to then present those bins for collection. And I think that if this was approved with the layout as proposed, it wouldn't prevent parking from blocking that bin access, which would make it in breach of those policies with bin access. So I think it would need a condition adding some sort of fence or gate to prevent car parking from blocking the bin access to the bin storage. I think that before approving it, we need to clarify the layout before we add a condition saying it needs to be developed according to the approved plans. We need to check the plans that they do actually have a door from the front door to the bedrooms. And I do think we should add the condition about noise insulation, because if a survey is done and it's found that actually noise insulation measures aren't needed, then that's fine, they won't be added. But if it's found that actually it does breach guidance and noise insulation measures are needed, then we should add a condition to make sure that they are implemented. I don't agree that just because other neighbouring properties don't meet guidance, that this property doesn't have to meet guidance. We should judge this application on its merits. So just with those 3 amendments, I'm happy to propose the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody willing to second that? Councillor Benton? Yeah. Okay, so that's proposed and seconded to take the officer recommendation to approve, subject to those 2 conditions and an updated or revised plans to reflect the door. Gareth, I don't know if you want to.
I think
summarise
with
anything.
the one about the drawing, I think members would probably have to defer it. I don't think you could put a condition on requiring a revised drawing if you feel that the revised drawing is what makes the application acceptable. I think you probably need to defer for a drawing to be submitted and then just allow officers to delegate the decision.
Yeah,
conditions.
I didn't understand Councillor Melly as proposing a condition on the updated drawing. I understood it as being that we can't, because the condition says, we'll say permission granted subject to drawing whatever reference number it is, and that drawing reference number has no door. So that reference number will need to be updated to reflect the updated drawing. So it's not saying that the condition is that new drawings have to be submitted in one sense, but in the other sense it is, I suppose. I mean,
either way,
if we have to delegate the final decision to officers in terms of the final approval be granted subject to the revised drawing,
yes,
whatever that wording would be appropriate. My view is I don't think we should be deferring. I think we should be testing the
well, it'd be delegated approval, so
yes.
not deferral. No.
Yeah.
My
okay.
mistake.
So I think the understanding then is that we're testing a delegated approval subject to the 2 conditions, and that delegation includes a revision of those drawings. So if I can see by show of hands all those in favour of that proposal. And anybody against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that's 2 against. Sorry, I didn't see the whole numbers of it on the committee, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favour. And so therefore that is approved, subject to conditions and the delegation to get those revised plans in place. Okay, thank you everybody for your time. I'm just going to take a very short adjournment while we just change over committee memberships and things. So I make it 5:35. If we could be back by 5:40 to recommence. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to this evening's meeting of Planning Committee B. We just got some changes of personnel around the table. So welcome to Councillor Baxter and Councillor Bassey, and Councillor Orrell has now left the meeting. Everybody else is as they were. So move us on to agenda item 4B, which is the application for 19 Baysdale Avenue, Osbaldwick. Gareth, if you could talk us through the plans, please.
So thank you, Chair. 19 Baysdale Avenue is a semi-detached dwelling, two-storey semi-detached dwelling. Planning application is, as you say, for a change of use from C3 dwelling house to a C4 house in multiple occupation. The applicant specified that would be 3-person occupancy. So the property is this one here with my my laser pointer outlining it. This is Tranby Avenue, and once again I've forgotten the name of the streets. Baysdale Avenue, running north-south. Baysdale goes across and carries on in a westerly direction. Street level photograph and proposed floor plans. So it's I think it's probably entirely original, unextended property. So it would be 1 bedroom, where the front reception is at the moment on the ground floor, 2 bedrooms upstairs, office storage. That would be too small to be used as a letting bedroom under licensing requirements. And there's no, I have no updates to the report.
Okay, any questions on the points, any clarification on the plans? Councillor Waters.
Given in the first paragraph, the proposal speaks about a 4-bedroomed property.
The applicants in their submissions states that it would be 3, and we've made it we've made that assessment on the basis of it being 3. Yeah, there's a recommendation condition covering on page 34, condition 4. Yeah, sorry, that is an error. Should put it up.
Okay, any further questions on plans? Nope. So we've clarified no updates, and we don't have any public speakers registered on this. So this is then just general questions on the report. So Councillor Fenton and Councillor Melly, and then I'll come to Councillor Waters.
Paragraph, thank you, 3.1, on the thresholds.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the street level threshold is 9.1%, so below threshold. This application would, in terms of street level, it would push it above the 10% street level threshold, would it not? Could it? It talks about the street level threshold, then talks about neighbourhood level. It being 10.5%, which would increase to 10.6, but so at street level it would increase to 10.9, so that would be above threshold. But then says neither the street level threshold nor the neighbourhood level have been breached. Well, the street level threshold would be breached, would it not?
No, because the wording of the policy, and we've had this discussion a number of times at committee, but the wording of the policy is that applications for the change of use from a dwelling house use class C3 to an HMO use class C4 so generous will only be permitted where And then Roman 2, less than 10% of the properties within 100 metres of the street length either side of the application site are exempt from paying council tax, or are recorded on the council's database or are known to the HMOs. So the starting point is what it is at the time of application, not what it would end up being. So whether that was the intention, I don't know, because it talks about the tipping point being 10%, but that's certainly what the policy says, and that's how we've interpreted it from the early days of the policy, although I think there might have been a bit of, you might be able to delve back and find back into 2014 and find decisions different, but certainly how we do it now is following that line.
So just for complete clarity, if this were to be approved, it would take it over the threshold. If there was to be a subsequent application, the street level threshold would already be breached. So therefore a subsequent application from a different property would be refused on the basis, or well, assumed to be refused on the basis that the policy threshold had been breached. But because we're currently below 10%, it's acceptable to take us over that 10% threshold because the policy only applies once that threshold has been breached.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay. Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering why the recommendation includes a limit on the number of occupants at 3. What is it about there being 3 occupants that would make it acceptable development, but if there was 4 occupants, it wouldn't be acceptable? Is it to do with amenity space or car parking space or cycle storage space?
Parking, generally, it's a parking issue because they can only provide one space. One independent space on site. Let me just take that. So they've just got that driveway space there. So that's the reason, and it aligns with the application. So that's what they applied for, and we wouldn't set that. We wouldn't set that limitation unless there was a hook, a reason why. But in this case, it's the parking issue.
So I know we look at each application on its own merits, and we don't look at other applications that are similar. But just in terms of consistent decision making and making sure we trying to use the same rationale, we've just approved an HMO with only 1 parking space that's 3 bedrooms, and we didn't include a condition to limit the number of occupants.
4 bedrooms, that one.
We didn't include a limit on the number of occupants in the conditions, I don't think. So is that, but are we including that condition, recommended to include that condition on this one because it's been volunteered by the applicant, rather than because officers have added it because they deem it necessary to make it acceptable development?
I'm afraid and I fully acknowledge that I'm the only person from the DLPA here, but my assumption is that they are single occupancy bedrooms on that previous one, just on their size, whereas this, because there's potentially, given their size, they could probably be occupied by more. So without a condition, you might get however unlikely it would be, that people would choose couples would choose to live in a single one.
I think it's not unlikely. I think it's very common. Couples,
well, I suppose it depends.
Parents.
It depends how you. Well, parents, because children don't count.
They do.
It depends how age they are. But in terms of licensing.
Yeah, I think there's been a court ruling that says children from birth count, and that court ruling happened because, not in York as far as I'm aware, but in London, lots of people were being evicted because they were pregnant, and it breached the thresholds for HMO occupants.
In planning terms, they wouldn't be a separate household?
No, but if there are multiple households, it doesn't matter how many people are from one household. The fact is they're from multiple households. So if you had a 3-bedroom HMO with a parent and child, in one bedroom and someone unrelated to them in another bedroom, and that would still be 3 people from multiple households, so it would still count as. Anyway,
I think that would be that would
sorry,
be-
we're getting off topic slightly, but
that wouldn't be.
my point, so my question is, so for the last application, did we not in planning need to set a limit on number of occupants, because that would be done by HMO licensing to do with bedroom size and how many occupants were allowed in each bedroom, whereas this one, because it's bigger bedrooms. More than
Well,
one.
I'm on this one, it's based on the issue the officer had was there was the parking issue. And the consideration was that it was necessary and reasonable because it only provided one parking space. And we talk in the report about street parking like we did in the last one. The previous one, on the merits of that case, the officer didn't recommend it, but you know, it's a fair point to ask the question. I'm not sure I can answer it directly by saying it wasn't required for whatever reason. Sorry about that.
Okay, councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Just turning to paragraph 5.6. It's clear that there isn't sufficient car parking within the curtilage of the property. There can only ever be one car that's manoeuvred independently. Is it now council policy to say, well, we'll approve these and you can park on the street? Now that's bearing in mind the absolute chaos that is currently on Tranby Avenue, largely caused by university-related parking and the results of previous planning committee decisions when they've approved student-led HMOs. In the real world that people have to live in, actually saying something like paragraph 5.6, there's room to park on the street, is absolutely ludicrous. If you've got a policy requiring sufficient off-road car parking, then it should be rigorously enforced and determined. Paragraph 5.6 alone is reason for refusal. My motivation in calling every single one of these HMO applications in month after month after month is so that the people living in the area, seeing their community be torn apart and turned into a student campus, can see how these decisions are made. Paragraph 5.6 is a reason for refusal. How many of you are going to take that reason up to protect council tax-paying residents?
I think that probably was a debate point rather than a question point, but I think just for clarity, Gareth, just so that I can be clear on where we are with the policy. So as I understand it, the policy is 1 parking space per 2 bedrooms. And does that then mean that a 3-bedroom requires 2 parking spaces? Is it because a 4-bedroom would require 2 parking spaces under that policy, but a 3-bedroom, how is the policy worded?
Well, at the moment, we don't have any parking standards. So what we use is the 2005 Development Control Local Plan, which wasn't adopted. And that's, I think, why, and again, there's some loose wording in here because it is referred to as a policy. I mean, just spotted that. But it's also said it's in 5.5, it says used as a guideline. And that says a maximum of 1 parking space per 2 bedrooms. So if it was a parking standard, we would say, and it wasn't assessed, wasn't stated as a maximum, then yeah, two spaces for 3 bedrooms. And there's a slight complication there because the HMO use class is expressed as residents, occupants rather than bedrooms, but we put it all in the mix. The policy that Councillor Waters refers to is in the SPD. And that refers to sufficient space for potential additional cars to park. That's in the SPD. It's in the written text of the policy, so it's not actually part of the written policy H8. So it doesn't have a standard. So we're making a judgment all the time on these in terms of the ability of people to park on the property, and if there isn't, you know, what are the impacts of people parking on the street? And we've made the assessment here that the road's wide enough for a car to park and a car to pass. Again, my 8 p.m. Sunday, 1:30 p.m. Monday, 7:30 p.m. Monday assessments, and the case officer daytime assessment was there's parking on the streets, one car parked. All those visits. In fact, it's this car, which is on Google Street View. It's the same car, parked in the same place. And that's our observation. And Tranby Avenue is at all those times was parked up, quite a significant amount of parking on street. But Baysdale, this section here wasn't. And so on the basis of the threshold levels of not being breached, we are in a situation where we say, well, we're making a judgment on the basis of one parking space, one car parked on the street potentially, on the basis of the guidelines that we have. And we didn't feel that a refusal was justified on that. We didn't think we'd be able to defend it, given the situation that exists on the ground of parking. And that's why the recommendation is what it is.
Okay, was that supplementary, Councillor Waters? No, I'll put you down, and Councillor Vassie was next.
Thank you, Chair. Reading through this report, one thing sprung out to me, and it was the paragraph 2.4 that I've not seen recently in such applications, and it left me asking a few questions of myself that I'd like to have some clarity from officers, please. It refers to the fact, and discussions have happened in this with this committee in the past, the fact that HMOs occupied by full-time students pay no council tax, and campaigners refer to the loss of income to a local authority, and if you get 20% of homes in an area not paying council tax, that amounts to a very significant sum. But what I'd like to understand is, I've read that councils are compensated for this by government. I've also read that local authorities like Canterbury estimate that it loses them hundreds of thousands of pounds every year. So either now or for the future, I think it would be helpful if we have a proper briefing note of the impact of any shortage of income to a local authority that comes from all of this. You might argue it's not directly relevant to this, but it is relevant to all of these ones that come before us. And I certainly would like to have more information as to the context of what happens here.
A question.
The question is, does government pay compensation? Does that compensate effectively for the loss of income to a local authority when it allows hundreds, thousands of homes to switch to HMS?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I would say it's not relevant to the decision to be made by the authority. I don't think on this planning application, I don't think we can take that.
In which case, why is it referred to here?
Where? In
2.4.
2.4, sorry, where does it? Where does it, it
It
says,
refers to properties being exempt from paying council tax because.
yeah, that's just to identify them as HMOs. So that's a way of, so the HMO database uses various data sources so we can get as accurate picture as we can of the number of HMOs there are in a particular area, so that we can then make that threshold calculation. And one of the ways of identifying them is if they're council tax exempt. So it's not an issue of the implications. The only implications of being council tax exempt for planning purposes is that means they're an HMO and they are getting included on the database. It's not an assessment of a loss of council tax revenue.
My concern would be members of the public might look at these reports and be left with more questions than answers. And that it would be helpful going forwards.
I think this is a repeat of the policy that's in the SPD, rather than something that's unique to this report. I've certainly seen this policy set out in this exact way, previous applications. As to the wider point, I think that sounds to me like possibly something to approach either corporate scrutiny or probably housing scrutiny in terms of, you know, whether or not there's any piece of work to understand the financial impact of any of this. But it may also be something that actually revenue officers will be able to give you a very direct answer to. I think the steer from Gareth is that for this particular application, we take the application on its merits, and that wider point is something to take elsewhere, I think. Councillor Waters, I had you next on my list.
Just briefly to assist Councillor Vassey, I ask for those figures every year. Currently, there's just over 4,000 educationally exempt HMOs in the City of York Council area, and that is an annual loss just over £6 million a year. The question that I wanted to ask of Gareth was in relation to paragraph 5.11. It refers to the amenity of future occupants in the application site, and the external layouts are considered to be adequate to meet the needs of the future occupants. What assessment has been made of the external amenity of the existing council tax-paying residents around the application property, bearing in mind it is next to 44 Tranby Avenue, which is potentially a 7-bedroomed student HMO, depending on how its appeal goes. And I'm particularly interested in the impact on the external amenity of 46 and 48 Tranby Avenue, 21 and 22 Baysdale.
Well, that's set out in 5.12 on page 33.
And how we start to assess that?
Well, it's a planning judgment of any, the same as we make an assessment of any planning application. The officer looks at, you know, what the information set out, the things to be assessed against set out in the HMO SPD and the policy, and has made an assessment that the occupation of that property as a 3-bed HMO shouldn't have an adverse impact on the residential amenities of surrounding properties.
The reason I put the point is that local authorities who have such policies up to date and written with the interests of the existing council tax-paying residents at heart have policies to prevent clusters of student-let HMOs. There's some of them won't allow 2 adjoined properties to be student-let HMOs. This is a point that was well and widely made at the local plan examination. Again, I could send members the policies from the other councils. We are trying to justify policy H8 and a supplementary planning document that were drawn up in 2011. They're woefully out of date, and they have not kept pace with what's been going on in York.
Okay, I think That to me is something that we have to weigh in our deliberations. Councillor Melly, I have you next.
Oh, I think that's.
Is it? All right, okay. Any further questions from anybody on the report? Can't see any further hands. So I can move us into debate then. We've obviously had a little bit Councillor Waters already, but if anybody wishes to add any further thoughts about this application, as I say, I'm not looking to test the recommendation at this stage, just any thoughts or considerations. Not seeing anybody wishing to make any further comment, in which case this application is recommended for approval. The guidance is that we test that recommendation first. So I'm looking for somebody to propose the officer recommendation. I've seen Councillor Melly first.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, again, I don't agree. I think that I don't agree that the condition to limit the number of occupants to 3 is reasonable or necessary. I think apart from that, I'm happy to go with the officer recommendation. I personally would change that condition, either remove it completely, or if fellow committee members felt there did need to be a cap, I would suggest more like 4 a minimum. I don't see how there's a policy basis to limit the number of occupants to 3 when we've just the parking policy is based on bedrooms, not occupants, and we have just approved a 4-person HMO with 1 car parking space. So I don't see how we can defend capping the number of occupants at 3 when there's no policy basis for it, and we've just made a contradictory decision a few minutes ago. So apart from that, I'm happy to go with the officer recommendation. I really don't think we should be taking in. It's not a student-let HMO. It's an HMO. It could be let to students. It could be let to non-students. And there are lots of reasons why people don't pay council tax or pay reduced council tax. When we have big blocks of 1-bedroom flats, we don't say, no, if you're a single occupancy, you get 25% discount. This isn't fair on people of York. When we're approving social housing or accessible housing, we don't say, no, people who live here are more likely to have council tax discount due to being on low incomes. We just look at housing and what housing is needed. I think students are part of they are residents of our city that we are here to make decisions on behalf of. They're members of our community. They contribute to our economy. I don't think we should be in discriminating against them in planning decisions, but this isn't a student HMO anyway. It's an HMO, and there are lots of people who live in HMOs for all sorts of reasons. So I don't factor that into my decision to propose the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to push you for clarity just in terms of what you're proposing, because you've suggested that you would like to remove the condition. Are you proposing approval with that removed, or are you proposing the?
I'm happy to take input from my fellow committee members on that. I personally would remove the condition altogether because I think there's enough, the bedrooms are large enough and there's enough amenity space, living space, kitchen space, even an extra room that can be a hangout space or storage. I feel that it isn't reasonable or necessary to put a cap on the number of occupants. That will be done by licensing anyway. I think if it's a small HMO, that puts a cap at 5 anyway, I think, even without a condition. But if my colleagues feel there is a need for a cap, I'm happy to take input onto what level that should be set at, whether 4 or 5.
Okay, in which case, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to seek a seconder just for a second. I'm just going to seek views on whether or not people wish that condition to be retained or removed. And I would just appreciate any input from any of the members in terms of what their view is on that. I saw Councillor Waters' hand first, and then I've seen Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, by all means, remove it. Let's have as much parking chaos as possible. You know, Gareth was very sensible a few months back when he was trying to impose an occupancy condition on one of these approvals, and obviously others want to see the parking chaos which will ensue when this becomes a student-led property, because that is what it is determined to be. That is what will happen to it. That is what is happening in the real world. If you turn it into a 4, a 5, 6, 7 bedroom, each one will have a car. They are independent households.
So just for clarity, you think the condition needs to be there to restrict the parking? That's the rationale behind the condition. Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenton.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting debate as to why for one and not the other. I think room size is an issue, in terms of the relatively large size of these rooms, and I suppose you have to think, well, would it be 6? Because if each room could accommodate 2 people, I think the context of this location, I think, is slightly different because of known issues on Tranby Avenue in terms of parking issues, we'll call it chaos, but non-parking issues. So I'd be reluctant to unpick it at this stage, but I think it's a fair point, but I wouldn't be supportive of unpicking this particular application. But I'm support a casino basis to refuse the application. But I think it's an interesting point, and the point of consistency in terms of when do you decide that such a condition is warranted on one property but not on other. I think we need to have a think about, but I'd be inclined to go with the Officer recommendation in terms of this one.
Councillor Bassey.
I'd agree with the points that Councillor Fenton's just made. I understand the points you're making. I personally have no problem whatsoever with students staying in homes in York. I think it's a completely arbitrary and artificial distinction. I think at heart, the problem here, as I've grown to understand it, and I do want this point to be made, is the inability of national government to approve our local plan. And what has followed on from that, our inability to get special planning documents done on this issue, and a whole load of other ones, the environment and everything else. But I can't see any reason to refuse the application as it's put in front of me. So I'm happy to go with that.
And so you're happy to retain the condition is the key point there.
Just stay with the conditions,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Thank you. And Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I don't think we can presume that this house, should it become an HMO, will be occupied by any particular type of person, gender, or installation of any kind. Clearly, there's limited parking space on there, and I think that in terms of the number of people in the property, I would prefer at this point to keep that condition as it is.
Okay, thank you. I think for what it's worth, I don't think there's actually necessarily a local plan issue with this one, because we've got the policy around the thresholds, and we can debate where that threshold is, and I think we did at full council and actually felt that in due course that needs to be reduced so we have more control. But it is where it is, and I don't have any concerns around the application of that policy. On the condition, actually, for my money, it's as much to me about retaining that living space as living space, not as an additional bedroom. So I think, on balance, if the officers felt that it's worth having there, I do absolutely take the point you're making, Councillor Melly, but my view is we just go with testing the officer recommendation as written. And then if there's the indication I'm getting is that people will likely want to approve that. If there was to be anything else, we can always come back to that. Did you want to make any more point?
Well, I was just maybe ask officers to clarify. I mean, if it would be approved to be developed according to the approved plans, which includes 3 bedrooms, but we did allow 4 occupants, would that mean that the living room or the office/storage could be turned into a bedroom, or would it have to be 4 occupants in the 3 approved bedrooms?
That's a good question. I think looking at it, the bedrooms are, and I don't want to try and work out the area in my head because I'm wrong. I think the bedrooms could well be of a size for double occupancy. The office, it is too small. That wouldn't be licensable. Conversion of the living stroke dining room. We wouldn't want to encourage that. We don't tend to put planning conditions on about retaining those amenity space. It's kind of implied in the occupancy, but that's something that's licensing would look at. I think the kitchen on its own wouldn't be big enough to. I don't think it would be big enough to allow the living dining room to be converted into a bedroom. They probably would have, if it would have, there's an HMO, it would have permitted development, so they could, they could extend the property without the need for planning permission, potentially up to a six occupants, loft conversion, rear extensions, which we wouldn't have control over. The planning condition limiting the number of occupancies does exert that control. So so there's I don't think that was in the mind of the officer when the recommended conditions were assessed, but it is a thing. They do have permitted development rights.
So if we amended the condition to limit it to 4 occupants, that wouldn't risk any of the rooms that are down as shared space becoming bedrooms?
I don't think I can answer that one.
Right,
Because the licensing we don't generally, and planning, because we're concerned about the use and the impact of numbers on other planning considerations like parking and things like that. And we tend to leave the internals generally to housing standards.
Okay, in that case, I'll take Councillor Crawshaw's point on board then, yeah.
Okay, I was just going to say, I mean, I think probably the indication is that the majority of the committee want to retain that condition anyway.
Yeah,
so
I don't agree, but if that's what the majority feels, I'm happy to, propose
so are
it
you happy to
Yeah.
propose
Yeah.
with that? So I am then looking for a seconder for that proposal. Councillor Vassy, thank you. So it's proposed and seconded to approve the application subject to conditions. Gareth, do you want to summarise, or have I covered it?
Yeah, I think that's covered, isn't it? It's as recommended on page 33 and 34 of the report.
Okay, so if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal, and anybody against, and there's no abstention, so that's 1 against, everybody else in favour. That is therefore approved. Which brings us to the end of the meeting. There's no urgent business, so thank you all for your time this evening, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.